Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, we're so lucky to have you here with us. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by my trusty sidekick and your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
And today we have rejoining us Peter Wehner, who's a contributing writer for The Atlantic and The New York Times. He's served in 3 presidential administrations, including as Deputy Director of Presidential Speechwriting for President George W. Bush, and later served as the Director of the Office of Strategic Initiatives. During his tenure in George W. Bush, he was a key advocate for PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is why we brought him here today to talk about what it is, what the current president has done to it, and what can we expect to be some of the implications. So welcome back to the show, Peter.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. So I want to start off by just setting some context. So the year was 2002, and this program that had wide-ranging bipartisan support, even from people in the faith community, libs, conservatives, Democrats, whoever. Everybody seemed to be very, very excited about this program. But set the stage for us. Like, what was the context? What was the environment? That kind of laid the groundwork for there being a need for this program.
Sure. Some efforts has been made over years trying to combat AIDS, but they're pretty marginal, pretty limited in the work that they're doing. A number of people within the Bush White House begin to focus in and get catalyzed around this issue. People like Gary Edson, Mike Gerson, and Josh Bolton in the White House. Bono, the rock star on the outside. President Bush is engaged in this issue, and so begin internal conversations about what needs to be done. And there's a real debate, actually, in terms of what the approaches would be, prevention versus treatment, what kinds of treatment, where would the AIDS office, combating AIDS office end up being. All of these issues are being sorted out. They're sorted out internally. And so in 2003, in the State of the Union, President Bush announces what's referred to as PEPFAR, which is the name of the program now. It's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And that is a $15 billion commitment. It's the largest commitment of any nation to combat a single disease in history. And it turns out to be the most successful life-giving global health program in history. It gets early on bipartisan support in the Senate. People on the left, Democratic Party like Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden, and Republicans like Bill Frist and Richard Lugar. And it passes. There are people internally that are not sure in the Bush White House whether we should go forward. A lot of resistance from some of the budget people who say it's much too much money because it was such an unprecedented amount. Some people not wanting it to be named in the State of the Union because they think it'll detract from domestic concerns and domestic issues. But President Bush really locks in on this and has a sense that this could make a profound difference. He has his humanitarian impulse. He has an impulse, I think, shaped by his Christian faith. And then there are advocates, Gary Edson, I mentioned, Michael Gerson, who's a very close friend of mine, key policy advisor, chief speechwriter of the president, who was advocating it, Josh Bolton, who at that time was deputy chief of staff. Anthony Fauci over at National Institutes of Health, and then we get people like a scientist at NIH, Mark Dybul, who ends up running the program for some number of years, who was terrific and important. So all these things come together, and the program is passed. And fast forward to today, and there are more than 25 million lives who have been saved.
Wow.
And it's an incredible success story. It's a humanitarian achievement of staggering proportions. It helps America in terms of foreign policy, creating goodwill within the nation. And up until the Trump era, is bipartisan, praised 5-year authorizations without really any problem. But it encounters turbulence beginning in 2023, when the reauthorization, members of Congress, Republicans who want to go from 5 years to 1 year, which begins to signal a weakness in the program, to where we are today, which is essentially the de facto dismantling of PEPFAR because of steps taken by President Trump, a series of executive orders he issued at the beginning of his second term in January.
So I would love to just kind of zero in on this, and if you could help us understand like what has happened to PEPFAR, and what does it mean that it's been essentially dismantled, I guess, like for people who don't really know what happens when a government entity or initiative loses funding, what essentially goes on with that, and is this indicative of something larger? Like, why is this concerning, I guess, for you as we're looking at the big picture?
Yeah, those are good questions, Josh. I mean, what is happening essentially is that President Trump issues these executive orders that fundamentally change foreign assistance as we know it. And so it includes a 90-day review of foreign aid, a subsequent stop work order that freezes all payments and services, and the dissolution of USAID, Agency for International Development, including the reduction of staff and contractors and the cancellation of most foreign assistance awards. So this is what happens. The AIDS office is in the State Department, but the main implementing agency for PEPFAR, think of it as sort of as a conveyor belt, is USAID. And USAID no longer exists. And so these contracts are cut off. And there are these people who are sacrificing, not making much money, in hospitals in Africa. And all of a sudden, the money stops, and it hasn't started again. A waiver is issued by Rubio for PEPFAR. It's essentially a Potemkin Village waiver. It doesn't really do anything. It's limited in what it applies to in the areas it's supposed to apply. It doesn't reach the ground. And so people are being laid off, and hospitals are closing. And there's some talk now about whether PEPFAR will be restarted by Rubio under the State Department as part of a reorganization. But it's not clear that that's going to happen. It's not clear that the funding is going to be anything like it needs to be. And even if it is, you've decimated the delivery system. And this is not like a light switch that you can turn on and off and back on again, because people have left. The entire infrastructure is being destroyed. And it took a lot of time at the beginning of PEPFAR to create that infrastructure. So even if the money were to be approved, and it's not clear that it would, the places that it would normally go, the infrastructure that had been set up doesn't exist in a lot of places. So and USAID doesn't exist as an agency because they decided to dismantle it, to destroy it. So this has huge implications for millions and millions of lives. There are estimates, these are credible estimates, that if PEPFAR isn't restored in some meaningful way, you could lose as many as 1.6 million lives in a single year, which is catastrophic. And I think what's so difficult for a lot of us is that this was a kind of intentional cruelty. It was so unnecessary. The status quo was doing tremendous good. Now, it doesn't mean PEPFAR was a perfect program. There are internal debates about how PEPFAR could have been more effective or could be more effective. But by any reasonable standard for a government agency, the achievements of PEPFAR stand alone. And so to have done this so willy-nilly, so capriciously, for no good reason. And if you wanted to reform PEPFAR or USAID, there are of course ways to do that. Those are ongoing live debates, have been for a long time. That's not how the Trump administration decided to do it. They decided to destroy it, to pull the plug on it, and then in the wake of the humanitarian ramifications, to put out spin talking points, and also, frankly, to promote lies of various programs when they wanted to undermine USAID. USAID. They were peddling stories about extreme woke programs that were being supported. Many of them actually not supported by USAID at all, but supported by other programs within the State Department. And then there was the ad hominem attacks against people in USAID, many of whom sacrificed a lot of money and devoted their lives because they wanted to help people and were helping people. And instead, they're vilified and caricatured as clumsy and stupid bureaucrats who are doing nothing good. So I think this administration is merciless. I think that they are promoting death and suffering on a mass scale. I think it's intentional, and I don't think that they give a damn.
Help us better understand like how our tax dollars were actually helping people on the ground. So, you'd mentioned earlier, in George Bush's State of the Union, he dedicated or announced $15 billion. I'm sure that there's been sort of a continuous stream of funding just to kind of keep the program going. But like, where does that money go, and how is it actually affecting individuals there?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's a kind of a conveyor belt. And so there are programs. USAID, as I said, is the main implementing agency, but there are other CDC. And so they work with the countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and elsewhere. And so the money goes to workers and to hospitals for treatment and for prevention efforts. So there's this whole web in which this infrastructure had been created, and so the money would go to support these efforts. And the amount of money as a percentage of the federal budget is just a fraction. It's far less than 1% for USA for PEPFAR. So this idea that you're doing it to save money, I mean, we're now in the midst of a debate in which the Trump administration and this big, beautiful bill that supposedly the president wants to promote for Republicans, including tax cuts, is going to dramatically increase the debt and the deficit, and they don't seem to care about it there. But then you get a program which is a fraction of the federal budget that does this enormous good, and all of a sudden they become budget hawks. But that's the way that these programs work. That's why you need the infrastructure. And so the money is going out, and there's a tremendous amount, by the way, of oversight for PEPFAR in terms of accountability. That was put in very early in the PEPFAR years. Randy Tobias, who had formerly been CEO of Eli Lilly, he was one of the people who was key in creating and setting up PEPFAR, and Randy was known for being a stickler for accountability. And I think it's fair to say that PEPFAR as a government program and as a global health development program had a reputation for that kind of oversight and accountability.
So one of the things that is like kind of being alluded to in all this, and maybe not alluded to, I mean, you've essentially said that the Trump administration is, what they're doing is like creating some major issues. And I guess one of my questions is like, how is it that, they're able to do what they're doing right now in terms of cutting these things where like maybe things that were blocked in Congress in the past. Like I guess that there's some massive cuts that were proposed previously that Congress blocked. So is it that Congress isn't blocking them? Is it that Trump isn't waiting? What's going on? Give us like a picture in your mind as to what is really unique about this moment. Because I hear a lot of people talk about like they love it, they love what's going on. I've heard some very concerning things about how people feel towards even others and immigrants. But a lot of times I don't know how to respond in terms of like systematically how bad this really is.
Yeah, it's a good question, and in a way, it's a complicated one because some of what the Trump administration has done, I don't think that they have the legal right to have done because these are programs that money that's appropriated by Congress and should be spent. But the reality is, the de facto reality is that the money was cut off, much of it through this Doge effort by Elon Musk and others, and that there are in some cases court challenges to whether they could do what they have done. But that's slightly irrelevant in the sense that the money has stopped, the infrastructure is being destroyed while this may be litigated in the courts. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that the Republican Party today is the wholly owned subsidiary of Donald Trump and MAGA world. So it's the MAGA ethic that is in effect, and they're in control of both the House and the Senate. So they're majority in both chambers, and so they are basically promoting this, and there are very, very few voices that want to do anything about it. We'll see what Marco Rubio, who was once a champion of PEPFAR, but this was Rubio pre-Trump, and like so many people in the Republican Party and almost every figure now in politics and in either members of Congress or elsewhere, elected politics, their character has been massively deformed by the Trump era, by the MAGA movement. Now, Rubio may try behind the scenes. It's a little unclear of how much he's trying to revivify PEPFAR. But as I said, the damage has been done. It doesn't mean that some of it can't be mitigated. But he's operating within a context, and it's an administration which is hostile to global health and development, and they really don't seem to care about the catastrophic human consequences. So it's an uphill fight, and the resistance that is being put up, whether it's legal or otherwise, appeals of people. While it's certainly worth doing to try and contain the damage, most of that damage is uncontainable, we're seeing this unfold in real time. I mean, since this order toward PEPFAR went into effect, in I think January 24th, 55,000 people have died already, and that ticker is going up every hour. So it's kind of chaotic, but there doesn't seem to be any real way to stop it.
And that's 55,000 people have died that we know, in the sense like we can directly tie it to the fact that it's been they've lost funding,
right?
And okay, so that's good to know. And so I guess just to make sure I'm understanding, is it like, so Congress has essentially said, hey, we're going to spend this money and here's like, you figure it out, executive branch, how to implement this through an agency. And essentially because these agency heads and like essentially authority comes through the executive branch, that they just basically came in and did a bunch of stuff. Like they have the actual mechanisms to stop payments, fire people, do the things that like I guess that's what we're seeing. And so, like, yeah, we can sue them. And there are a lot of suits. I think I looked up like 300 plus lawsuits against the administration since January. And so we have a lot of these, but they're going to be, that's going to take time.
Yeah, I think that's essentially the right way to understand it. I mean, there's this debate. It's the term of art is impoundment, which is whether administrations can impound certain money that Congress has authorized, and they just don't spend it. So this is a debate that's going to be arbitrated through the courts. But for our purposes, you've got this stop work order, the freezing of all the payments for work, including work that's underway. And as I said, the dissolution of USAID, which has happened. It doesn't exist as an agency anymore. And so what happens on the ground is that these places, hospitals, medical centers, workers, doctors, others who are living kind of week to week, month to month, for their survival and counting. This is part of the reason why the 5-year reauthorization for USAID was so important, because they needed to have some guarantee that the money would be coming over multiple years rather than year to year, and as a signal to the rest of the world, because we're the leader of this effort. And if American leadership withdraws, then other countries will go to the sidelines as well. So yeah, this money stops, and all of a sudden, because there's no expectation this is going to happen, and no money is coming for weeks and weeks and weeks, and these places are being closed down, and then there are drugs which are being stored, and the mechanism from getting them from where they're being stored to the hospitals is no longer working. So that's a kind of supply chain problem. So you've actually, in some cases, had these drugs that could save lives, but they're not. And the reason they're not is because this infrastructure has been so badly damaged. In the meantime, there are these debates, which are serious debates going on about what does impoundment mean, and do you have to spend the money, and are there legal challenges to whether the president's executive order applies, how much does it apply, and all of the rest. But in the meantime, you have this cascading catastrophe.
I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the bipartisan nature of how this bill came into existence. Doing a little bit of research and kind of specifically focusing on the faith side, I was surprised to see an interview even by like Franklin Graham, like promoting this program. So I'd love for you to maybe just talk a little bit about like the faith community support for this when it first started, and what you're seeing or hearing kind of today as it is gone.
Yeah, well, the faith community was on board by and large in 2003 when President Bush was promoting that. Now, some of that among the white evangelical movement, I think, was a product of the fact that it was a Republican president who was supporting it. So there are good relations, generally speaking, with the administration and the evangelical world. But then you have people who, quite apart from this is, let's call it, the political tropisms that exist, that really care about this. People like Rick Warren, who was important in this effort. Franklin Graham, when he's not wearing his political hat, runs Samaritan's Purse, which has done a lot of good work. And so I think Samaritan's Purse was on favor. Places like World Vision were supportive of it. The Catholic bishops, my memory is that they were particularly supportive of it and really leaned into this program. So yeah, there was real effort within important parts of the evangelical and Catholic world and elsewhere to support this. It was never primus inter pares. It was never first among equals for evangelicals. I think it's more so for Catholics. I think it's fair to say. But key evangelicals at various moments stepped up. Some did not. People like James Dobson. He would. I think, if my memory is right, the effort with Dobson was more to keep him from a frontal assault on PEPFAR rather than support for it, because of uh, the belief that condoms would promote sexual promiscuity. Condoms was it was a small part of the program, but for prevention purposes, actually was effective in terms of the spread of the disease. But the evangelical world is shaped by a culture and a subculture, that basically signals in ways that are overt and more subtle. What do you care about, and what don't you care about? And what they cared about was abortion and sexual ethics, homosexuality, in particular. And those are the issues that tend to drive evangelicals and their activism on politics. But when you get into the realm of global health and global development, very few know about it. Very few pastors have historically, acquainted themselves with it. So there's a lot of, ignorance going on. I don't mean that as a pejorative. They just don't really know about the program. They haven't studied it. They weren't aware of what it was doing. And then when it is brought to their attention, there's a sense of, maybe, well, that's good. I'm glad it's being done. But there's no real investment, I would say, in it. And again, there are some exceptions, honorable exceptions to that rule. But as a general matter, it just has not been on the radar of the white evangelical movement. My view, it should be, and it absolutely should be now, given the destruction that's happening. But you hear very few white evangelicals weigh in on these matters today, and to the extent that they do, many of them are within the MAGA orbit, or they're Trump supporters, so they're actually defending what's happening rather than willing to speak out about it and to say stop.
So, I would love for you to respond to this kind of. It's not really an argument, but it's kind of more. It encapsulates or represents kind of the ethos of a lot of the people that I talk to that might be Trump supporters, or consider themselves really MAGA, or maybe they just are feeling like, hey, I don't really mind what he's doing. There's a lot of corruption in the deep state, quote unquote, right? I mean, I've literally heard conversations where people are said, oh yeah, like this person is in the deep state, like this, this senator or this congressman or
Right.
congresswoman, and without any, straight face, right? There's as much genuineness there as you can have,
Right.
right, and belief about this. And they would just say, hey, this needed to be cleaned up. And when you're president of the United States, every decision you make results in someone dying or something happening, right? I mean, and I'm not trying to be crass, but this is the kind of stuff I hear. And how would you respond to that kind of logic in a way that, again, I mean, pointing out the issues that you see, but as gracefully, I guess, as you can muster?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, that reality you're describing exists. And why do people within MAGA world hold the views that they do? It's a spectrum, of course. For a lot of those folks that you're talking to, Josh, I would bet my bottom dollar that it's an information stream problem, right? They're not tuned in to the New York Times or ABC News, or and they're not reading reports by the Kaiser Family Foundation on PEPFAR. They're listening to Fox and Newsmax and Tucker Carlson and that whole right-wing ecosystem, which is massive. There's nothing on the left that's comparable to it. There's the manosphere. There's, Joe Rogan and podcasts galore. And so there's this information stream that's coming forward, and they're pushing out information that's just wrong. Some of it is disinformation, some of it is misinformation. So that's one thing. Then the second thing is that there's just a kind of, I would say, reflex, which is they voted for Trump. That many cases they adore him. They consider him a fighter. They have been fed a lot of information about the so-called deep state, this idea that all of government and everyone working within government, including civil servants, are left-wing woke people who are dedicated to destroying Christian values, destroying American ideals, destroying the country as we know it. And the deep state is targeted Donald Trump and is out to promote every awful cause that you can imagine. So it's the demonization of civil servants. Civil servants are people who work in these government agencies, regardless of who's president. So there are political appointees, and then there are these civil servants. And civil servants help make government run because, by and large, they're very able and capable people, experts in the field, and they keep things running. Whether you're talking about the Treasury Department or the State Department or Department of Defense or any of these agencies. So there's this demonization that's gone on. And then there's this somewhat arbitrary promotion of fiscal responsibility being deficit hawks. As I said, they're going to bust the budget again. Donald Trump is responsible for the debt going up by himself in this first administration by basically a quarter. And there was no interest then, and in many respects, there's no interest now on limiting spending. But on the other hand, when it's convenient for their cause, they love seeing Elon Musk running around with a chainsaw, right? They, oh, great, this guy's going to cut spending. But he's going after programs, as I said, it's sort of pennies on the dollar, that would make virtually no dent in the debt and the deficit, and yet have massive ramifications because of the programs that they're cutting. And then some of this, Josh and Will, is just confirmation bias and motivated reasoning. A lot of these people that you're talking to are alienated from the Democratic Party. They're Republicans. More than that, they're Trump supporters, and they're in MAGA world. And that conditions how they see the world, and it conditions the information that they pay attention to, and it conditions how they interpret the information. But basically what's happened...
When you say MAGA world, Peter, could you just describe that just a little bit more? Because, how would you describe MAGA world?
Yeah, I mean, MAGA world is essentially a political movement that Donald Trump helped create. It was organic in the sense that there were always elements in the American right that were populist in orientation. And populism is different than conservatism. And so this existed. Trump taps into it, empowers it. A lot of it is white working class people that are inspired by Trump. Really, in 2016, that's when the movement begins, and it's kind of ethnic nationalist in its attitude. It is a kind of America First mentality. It's highly critical of immigrants. It's worried about the cultural shifts that have happened. It's tired in terms of American leadership in the world. It believes that the so-called deep state is woke and almost all powerful, and as I said earlier, wants to destroy almost everything that they care about. And I would say that the MAGA movement today is nihilistic or quasi-nihilistic. It's an impulse to destroy. There's very little impulse to build and to construct. It doesn't want to reform programs. There's just a lot of anger. A sense that this whole system is broken and it deserves to be burned to the ground, and the people who constructed it and the people who inhabit it are wicked and evil and motivated by bad things, and they hate us, and Donald Trump is there to fight on our behalf. And what has happened, in my estimation, is that this has become an almost kind of cult of personality. And the reason I say that is, I mean, I know a number of people who held views completely contrary to the views that Trump and they now hold. The only reason that they've changed their mind is because Trump changed his mind. I mean, a lot of people I know, for example, were pro-free trade, and Trump is a protectionist. Now, for as long as I was part of the Republican Party before the Trump era, it was a pro-free trade party, and now it's hyper protectionist. And let's take another area that you've seen a flip during the Clinton era. Morality as a feature of politicians and those in public office, and especially the president, was essential. The argument was, if you are morally depraved, or that you're involved in sin or corrupt in any ways, including in your personal life, including in infidelity, that's a disqualifier, or virtually a disqualifier. So you go to the Lewinsky-Clinton scandal. Every day, figurative 2x4, hitting Bill Clinton upside the head. The Southern Baptist Convention putting forth a resolution in 1998 saying that moral character is absolutely essential in public leaders. Books being written, articles being written, talk radio constantly hitting this issue. Bill Clinton is not moral, and therefore he's disqualified. Now fast forward to Donald John Trump, a man who in many ways makes Bill Clinton look like a Boy Scout, a man of borderless corruption in every area of his life, personal, business, political. And what happens? They don't care. You see it in the polling. You see it in the practical effects. They're just indifferent. He can do anything at all. So you've got that as an example, and I could go through a dozen different things. So what does that mean? It means that many people, and of course this, we're talking about millions and millions of people, so you have to take facts and circumstances. You need certain qualifiers and caveats. But as a general matter, they have invested in Trump, and he is a personification of what they want, of what they see as a fighter. And he vivifies them. His style of politics, his brand of politics, the cruelty, the aggression, excites them. They feel like they have created a drama. Now they're part of this sort of great drama, children of light, children of darkness. And so that once that attachment happens, wherever he goes, they'll follow. And you can even see it if you follow the right-wing ecosystem literally from week to week, because Trump himself will often change, right? He'll make one argument and then he'll make another argument that's antithetical to it. He'll make one decision and then he'll do another. And they just keep following him, which of course, in some objective sense, they're twisted themselves into knots. But that's how it works. So you're dealing here in a lot of cases with people who've absolutely bought into them. How do you deal with that when you're talking to somebody? Let's take here concretely the issue we're talking about, PEPFAR. Some of it depends on the individual. I mean, if you're talking about someone who is a very deeply committed MAGA person, Trump supporter, the likelihood that you're going to amass any data or information that's going to make them rethink their view is virtually nil. It's like shooting BBs against a brick wall. They simply won't allow contrary empirical data to enter into their field of vision because they don't want to be challenged. They believe what they believe, and they only want information that confirms what they already believe. Then there are others who are not as dedicated in their support for Trump, who are more open. And there, in my experience, it's really a matter of creating a relationship with those people that is not defined by politics, where some measure of trust is in place, which opens the door for people hearing contrary data. And then a lot of it is just the presentation, because you people don't, and this is true of all the three of us and everybody else we know, you don't want to be assaulted, feel like you're being assaulted in convictions that you have, right? If you feel like somebody's going after some deep belief you have, some core identity you have, and they're doing it aggressively, feelings of anger, resentment, shame, embarrassment, all those things kind of rise up. And when they do, we kind of push back and we get aggressive. Basically, it's like just back off. So there, I think it's just a person by person, longer term project to trying to be able to say, and then genuine curiosity. Tell me about how you've come to believe what you believe. Tell me what it is about Donald Trump and his movement that you feel like is important. That's won over your confidence or won over your allegiance. What do you think about the people who are critical of him? Some people say this about it. What do you think about that? That's a kind of civil conversation, and in some cases it opens the lines of communication, and then you may be in a position in which people might be open to it, or you might be able to send somebody some information to say, government can make mistakes, and there's a lot that can go wrong in government programs. There's a lot of waste, but there's also some good that goes on. And here's some people, Christians, who are working for World Vision in Nambia or Senegal, and they're saving lives. They have been saving lives. They've given a lot of their time. Their entire life is devoted to this now. And here's what they're saying. These are people who believe, they're Christ followers like you are. They're actually on the ground. And this is what they're finding. These are the people who are dying. These are the drugs now because of this executive order that are not getting to the hospitals to save them. Tell me about kind of those people. How do you feel about that? So I think that's the kind of conversation. But it takes time, and it doesn't always work. But that's the kind of challenge we have in the epistemological chaos that we exist in.
I want to talk about America's soft power and how it relates to PEPFAR and even USAID. Because I remember, I think it was a month ago, Myanmar had a really huge earthquake. There was some reporting that some USAID workers were actually fired while they were there. And I guess I'm wondering, like broadly speaking, the world tends to focus more on American politics than we do other countries' politics. What's your sense of America's ability to still wield any level of soft power whatsoever?
Well, I think that's been deeply, deeply damaged during the Trump era. But you're right. I think your point is important. There is such a thing as soft power, and that means power that's not military, but it's through diplomatic means, through things like global aid and global development and health efforts and things like that. That stuff matters a lot, because what it does, and we saw this with PEPFAR, is that it creates goodwill, and countries begin to trust you, not just in that particular area, but in broader areas. And they feel like, well, I've got a reliable partner. We've got a country that's actually taking steps in the United States that's helping us. It's saving lives. It's a sacrifice. They're giving the money. They're giving the time. They're running the programs, and they appreciate it. So that generates goodwill, and that has ramifications which can be really, really good in all sorts of ways, diplomatic and otherwise. So that's part of foreign policy. Now, in countries like America, traditionally, soft power has been more important than in totalitarian countries, like the Soviet Union and now Russia or China, because they tend to do business in a different way. But it's not irrelevant even to those countries, because they realize that goodwill can help them too. So they're going to try and step into the void that's left, by America. And so some of these countries, which would have been inclined to work with America, will say, well, you've turned your back on us, so we're gonna look elsewhere, and that's happening. And the decimation of the infrastructure, as I said, has been catastrophic. But it's also the breach of trust, which I'm not sure enough people have really focused in on. I was at uh, had a conversation yesterday with somebody who knows a great deal about USAID and global development, and he was talking about that, which is, even if these programs were revivified, just say Rubio decided to put it in the State Department. I mean, the signal has now been sent that this thing is turned on and off and on and off. And so that kind of trust, which you need, he was describing to me, if you're a doctor in an African country and you've just experienced what they've experienced, and now the U.S. government comes back to them and say, "Oh, we're starting up again, and the money's going to be there. Are you going to upend your life again to commit to efforts that depend on a commitment of the U.S. government?" And the answer in a lot of cases is no. Burned once, shame on you. Burned twice, shame on me. So that kind of trust matters, and we're seeing it in other areas too. I would say, for example, with the tariff policies that Trump has. I mean, they change every week, seemingly up, down, this country on, this country off, and at some point these countries can't understand, they can't be part of the psychodrama every week. They can't adjust, on and fundamentally change their policies on a week-to-week basis. So they have to make some kind of judgments, which is that the United States is not a trustworthy partner anymore, and we have to adjust to that reality. So that's part of the real world ramifications when you have this kind of chaotic administration that shifts from hour to hour.
Pete, Josh and I are really, really lucky and fortunate to be able to speak to really, really smart folks like yourself, and a whole wide range of others. And we spoke with a former federal prosecutor the other day from Protect Democracy, Christy Parker, great person we've had around before. She used to work in the Civil Rights Division. So I asked her, I said, Josh and I are just normal bystanders. We have paying jobs that we go to every day,
Right.
and we podcast and stuff. But, we're fortunate to be able to talk to really smart people. And I was like, you being a person in the DOJ, on a scale of 1 to 10, I asked her, I was like, how concerned should we be? And without even hesitation, she was like, we're at an 11. And I'm like, whoa. So she broke it down. It was really helpful. So I love for you to kind of make an assessment of where we are in the country. And you don't have to necessarily just keep it to PEPFAR or USAID, because you've worked for a number of different presidents. You understand this stuff probably better than most people. But I think most Americans, depending on where you're getting your news from, will have a different feeling about sort of the state of America today, because most people are they'll hear some bad news and then they'll go to McDonald's, or
Right.
and just live their lives. So
Yeah.
I love for Pete to give us give us your assessment of where we are in America today, and that'll be our last question. Love for you to close us out.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're in a crisis, and the question is how bad the crisis will get. And I think the answer to that is we really don't know, and it depends on what domain you're talking about. Apropos your conversation with Ms. Parker, will Donald Trump invoke martial law at some point? We don't know. Could he do it? Absolutely. Would he be legal and have the right to do it? Probably not. Would that stop him? No. We've seen that before. It doesn't mean that he will do it. Will he defy a Supreme Court order? Maybe or maybe not. I think it depends on what that Supreme Court order would be. I'm sure Justice Roberts is aware of that, so he's going to probably try and prevent a direct confrontation with Trump where possible, but that may not be possible. Are they going to fail to recognize or tilt the playing field on elections, not recognize certain results. Well, we've already seen that, right? 2020 election, where they said that the thing was rigged. So there's that whole realm of, let's call it, democratic institutions, democratic way of life that can be upended. You see the assaults on the universities, you see the assaults on news media, you see the assaults on law firms. That stuff really matters. And you see the capitulation almost across the board of various people that you wouldn't have, or institutions that you might not have expected would bow at the knee of Donald Trump, but they're doing it. ABC is doing it. CBS, there's a big controversy now, 60 Minutes, because 60 Minutes has been too critical in the mind of Trump, of course, of him and the owner of the conglomerate that owns 60 Minutes has lots of other business, and so they're afraid. So they're making deals with Trump. We see it with Jeff Bezos backing off the Washington Post. So that's really, really serious. Then you have an entirely different realm, not entirely different, but somewhat different. The absolute decimation of the National Institutes of Health, which is unbelievably chaotic. It's the greatest health institution of its kind in the world, or at least has been, and it's just being destroyed. And you won't see the effects as much in the immediate term, though you will see some of that. But we're really talking in 5 and 10-year increments, when a lot of this research that would come to fruition won't, because funding is stopping. Students and others are going to go overseas. You see it in PEPFAR, you see it in USAID, you see it now in the FDA. You haven't heard much about this, but this is a huge issue. There are not many people that can do what the people at the FDA do, and they're being wiped out. Then you have the area of the economy, the prices, because of the tariffs and other things, to stagflation come back into effect. So you may see, the Trump era and its negative effects in sort of day-to-day things, like how much eggs cost and how much, if you want to buy a new or used car, and all of a sudden it's $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 more than it otherwise would have been. That's not the end of American democracy, but it's a problem. If you're talking about NIH, you're talking a lot of people who have, cancer, that are going to be in pain and going to suffer and going to die because of certain efforts that have been made that are now being stopped. And then you have this threat more broadly to American democracy. And then you have overseas. Does Trump have the steadiness? If when there's a crisis, world crisis that happens, and a lot of what happens in foreign policy is, can other countries trust you, or what do they think that you're going to do? And so if you have somebody who's capricious and unreliable and unsteady and chaotic, they can take certain actions and draw the wrong conclusions from it. So all of those areas are live and real, and it'll be bad, but the question is, will it be, worst case scenario? And my fundamental, I guess, premise here has long been that Donald Trump, here I'm being descriptive, not pejorative, is sociopathic. I mean, I think he clearly has narcissistic personality disorder. He's a vindictive narcissist. There are all the signs that is the case. And when you give that kind of person the power of the presidency, you're asking for trouble. And it's one of the reasons why I just wrote and banged the pots and pans before the election, because what I was trying to tell people is, don't give him that power, because once you do, your options are limited. There's just a lot you won't be able to stop. And I think we're in that position. Now, that doesn't mean that the worst case will always happen. Some people can draw comfort that his, first term, he tried to, obviously, to impede the election, fomented an insurrection, violent insurrection against the Capitol and against members of Congress. So that should have been all the warning people needed. But we survived the first Trump term, and maybe we'll survive in some form the second Trump term. But this is different because he's worse and the people that he surrounded himself are much worse. So the kind of individuals that he had, cabinet members and otherwise, White House staff, chiefs of staff, who were able to keep the worst ideas, his worst impulses from being translated into policy and action, they don't exist anymore. And you've got this entire MAGA world, and they are essentially accelerators to Trump's worst tendencies rather than brakes. So I'm worried about it, but this is what America has bought on itself. There were, 77 million or more Americans who looked at Donald Trump in sum total and said, this is the man we want to lead America. This is the man for the moment. This is the man that embodies the ethic that we believe in, the policies that we believe in. He is the temperamental representative of what we want. And so they went forward and they gave him that power. And now we're living with the consequences. That's the nature of democracy, including when democracy becomes diseased.
I'm laughing because it's like one of those things where you laugh at a funeral and you feel like awkward. I'm the kind of guy who laughs at a funeral.
Look, I mean, I'm not temperamentally or dispositionally dark. It's just my analysis of the situation. The last thing I'll let you guys go, but the last thing I'll say is just as followers of Jesus, I do think that we have a different perspective that we bring to bear on this. It doesn't mean that these awful things aren't going to happen. They're happening even as we're talking. I do think that it gives us a kind of an insulation because we believe fundamentally that we're citizens of another city than this one. And there is, I think, in some deep sense, for most of us who are Christians, the conviction that God is the author of the story. Now, that doesn't mean that at any given chapter within that story, any particular act in this unfolding drama isn't filled with tension and difficulty and setbacks. But there is an author and there is a story and there is an ending in which all things are made new again. And, we have to hold on that. And the other thing I would say to you, to myself, to people who are listening, which is, we're called to be faithful, not necessarily successful. Frederick Buechner has this world. Frederick Buechner has a quote where he says, this is the world, something to the effect of beautiful and terrible. Be not afraid. It's mixed. It's part of the human story. It always has been. It always will be until redemption. And so we're called not to be afraid. We're called to be witnesses in word, but I would say especially in deed. And we have to, lean into hope and do all we can within the worlds that we live in to make a difference. None of us can change the course of history in the world or even in this country. But all of us can make a difference within the communities we're a part of, the families we're a part of, the neighborhoods we're a part of, the community groups we're a part of, the Bible studies we're a part of. And that's what we're called to do. And if enough of us do that and do it reasonably well and reasonably faithfully, that can make a difference too.
I mean, I absolutely agree. And I'm starting to listen to a biography on Andrew Jackson, and it is amazing to see the parallels between Donald Trump and Andrew Jackson, and it's worth a conversation at some point. And but you just see, like, I guess my point of that is people can go back and they can look at historical precedents and start to see, like, and the question isn't, well, we held up then. Yeah, but that was a different America than we have now. And so the question is does the America of now, can it handle an Andrew Jackson type without the, religious and, because he was a religious man, Andrew Jackson, without that kind of, that more, his character shaping in the beginning. through church. So I know that Trump went to church, but it's a little bit different. Anyway,
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on, Peter. Thanks so much for being a part of what we're doing. Are there ways that you want people to follow your work, and what projects do you have coming up next?
Oh, they can just Google I write for the Atlantic, the New York Times. I just did an interview with Rowan Williams, who was Archbishop of Canterbury and
Yes.
is an extraordinary human being. And so I did that as part of a series that I do with the New York Times, interviewing theologians. I'm actually going to do an essay for the Atlantic on PEPFAR and the Christian response to it. So I'm in the midst of that. I'm going to do an essay for the New York Times with John Roush, who's a friend and colleague on the Democratic Party, kind of where it is and what it needs to do to recover. So
yeah, we had him on a couple weeks ago.
John. Yeah, I know John is terrific, and his new book, Cross Purposes, was very helpful to a lot of people of faith. So I'm going to continue to write and sort of speak the truth as best I can, and you can be a theoretical pessimist, but you should be an operational optimist, as a friend once told me. And so I think to the degree we can all be operational optimists, that's all to the good.
Well, I really appreciate those words. And to our viewers and listeners, this has been Peter Wehner. Just make sure that you go and check out his work. We'll put links in the show notes. And guys, like, subscribe, do all the things that help get this out to more people so people can be impacted and at least get these conversations moving and happening. And so, guys, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Thanks.